What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast, the ultimate sports history pod where hindsight is 4040. We're excited to jump into today's topic, but first, a quick word from our sponsors.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Osama Dahud. What's up, man? How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. So on today's episode, we are going to be discussing one of the hot topics in the NBA these days, and that is the new CBA, which has been leaking out piece by piece. So we're going to discuss some of the main issues and things that have come out about it, and we're going to try to put it in a little bit of a historical context with the lockouts and previous CBA discussions in 1999 and 2011. So we'll start with the lockouts in 99 and 2011. Do you remember what those were about and what some of the impacts were of the lockouts? We'll start with 99.
Well, I'm going to date myself a little in maybe a slightly younger way. I was like in middle school during the 99 lockout. So I remember the season. I don't remember it starting late. Like I remember the 98 season punctuating with Jordan's shot over Byron Russell. By the way, still the most watched NBA game of all time. They still haven't been able to produce something as captivating as that, I guess for good reason.
Nothing else was on TV.
Yeah, maybe they didn't have Game of Thrones, right? 1999. So there's the I didn't remember the season starting so late. It was like 200-day lockout. So it was like a 50-some game season. So I only remember the season itself with San Antonio winning, but I don't remember the actual. But the details are essentially like a dispute over the salary cap. They couldn't agree with the Players Association and the owners on a salary cap structure. They wanted a hard cap. The players union wanted more of a soft cap. So the revenue share was a big issue. The league wanted more revenue share. The players union wanted more equitable distribution. And some of that too was like guaranteed contracts for the minimum. So the minimum was kind of stuck around 200,000, no matter how long you played in the league, going into the 99 season. I think after that, what they did was, with the new CBA, they did include the soft cap. They did increase revenue sharing, and they maintained guaranteed contracts, and they increased the minimum salary as well. It started to go up after 5 or 6 years in the league. So people that were rewarded for staying in the league, even if they were on minimums, they started making $500,000 up. And that continued to go up throughout the 2000s. So it was a positive result for the Players Association because the 88 and 95 lockouts were so bad. The owners got such a lopsided agreement over the players, and it was the contracts were too long and minimums were really bad. So this one was kind of the first win for the league going into the post-Jordan era for the players.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it, but this is one of the longer lockouts. There was a couple other ones that lasted like a couple months before the season. I think that was 95, right? And one that lasted a couple hours, which is funny that it's even mentioned. But this one shortened the season by 32 games, canceled the All-Star game, all that stuff. So it had a significant impact on the NBA and the schedule and that stuff. So for the 2011 lockout, you mentioned that the 99 one was a victory for... I guess it was kind of a victory for the owners, but it was a kind of a rising tide lifts all boats moment because the guaranteed contracts were a little adjusted, but there was more money for the league minimum and things like that. So the 2011 one, it was similar in that it shortened the season. Instead of 50 games, it shortened it to 66 games. So obviously it was quite heated. But what about the 2011 lockout was a little bit different than 99?
It was more about capital losses. Like the NBA lost a lot of money before that lockout. The salary cap dropped. Team had less money for players and coaches and other stuff. And that's because 22 out of the 30 teams were losing money. The NBA isn't like baseball where you can keep the money you make. It's put into that league fund, that revenue share. And the league needed to continue to operate more like a business, reevaluate their model, try to appeal to more people. Because other markets like soccer had figured out how to do that with merchandise, ticket sales, promotion. So it was it was a fundamental business issue. So, capital gains, rev share, salary cap, small market versus big market. You had like your Lakers and Bulls and Heat dominated. They had these huge fan bases. They were able to go over the luxury tax. It was just there was no parity between small market and big market. There wasn't a level playing field. Trades and salary dumps were an issue. Contracts, a huge issue. When they signed contracts, that some of those used to kill teams for years. So they were trying to eliminate guaranteed contracts. That was a dispute as well. But what they ended up doing when they agreed in that 2011 lockout, they had a more restrictive salary cap structure, shorter player contracts. They kind of reduced player salaries a little bit, which is funny in hindsight after kind of the 2016 salary cap and TV deal, right? So even though they were reduced, it did end up paving the way for what the league is now.
Yeah, so we've set the stage. So we talked about the past two, major CBA negotiations and the lockouts and that sort of thing. So I think we can pivot a little bit to what we're talking about this year. So there was, I wouldn't say a real threat of a lockout looming. I think there's a lot of money at stake, and I think a lot of the players and, of course, the owners realize what's at stake with a potential new team in Vegas, with a new TV deal coming up, I believe, in 24-25. So I think it was in the best interest of all the parties to come to the table and agree to some things. So what we'll do in this segment is we'll talk about some of the major topics that have come out, or major changes that have come out in this CBA, which from the initial view of it, from the initial reaction, if you listen to guys like Draymond on his podcast and some of the, I would say, overwhelming sentiment on Twitter is that the players lost. So I don't know how you feel about that, but we can go through each one and we can talk about the impact on each of the players, or not each of the players, but all the players and the owners and such. So the one that I want to start with is actually an idea that you had. I don't know if it was an original idea, but we talked about it during our All-Star pod. And it is the inclusion of an in-season tournament for the NBA. Think of it as kind of a Champions League in the NBA. So the details are basically the first round of the tourney is going to be part of the regular season schedule. The top 8 teams advance to a single elimination event in December. So it's kind of like a March Madness type deal. And then the final 4 will be played at a neutral location, probably like Las Vegas, maybe somewhere without an NBA team, maybe one of the bigger stadiums, just like Final Four, they play it in Houston at Energy Stadium. And then the teams are expected to play 80 regular season games instead of 82. And it could eventually be that the two teams and the two final teams play 83 games instead of 82. And these games, of course, count towards the regular season standings. I'm not quite sure how they're going to figure that out. And also the prize money for the in-season tournament, if you win, is $500,000 per player, which is not all that much for most of these guys. But so do you think the NBA stole your idea? But I mean, if they did, what do you think about it?
It's funny. I did pick, I think, 8 teams. I think was my original idea, was to kind of consolidate it. And I think this is kind of
I was saying we should do a losers bracket too. But yeah, 8 teams works.
Yeah, and well, they played it safe, so the prize isn't that high. They didn't reduce the number of games at all. They also didn't add a bunch of games either. So it was a safe bet where they kind of made it a part of the season. They made it kind of an easy way to make it a part of the season without getting rid of All-Star Weekend or anything like that. It just kind of becomes a part of the schedule. Kind of like what soccer does, where you have middle of the week tournaments, like in the Premier League, you have like your FA Cup and then your Premier League games on the weekend. So they're kind of doing it like that. So the couple of games that aren't played out of 82, the 2 games, I think, for other teams just get rescheduled, like if for the teams that advance and don't advance. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fine. I think it's obviously they don't know what the opportunity is exactly. So they're introducing it this way with low incentive. They're not changing the schedule significantly. It's a kind of an A/B test. They're kind of testing the waters to see how much revenue can this generate. Because I think there is a way to grow the game if you can add stakes to the regular season. And this is, I think it's just safe. There's no interest in it now because it's never happened before. It's never been done. So if you don't care, I understand. But hopefully they execute it right and give fans more of a reason to care.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I like it. I think my initial reaction, like to most things. So when we talked about it on the All-Star pod, I was all for it because my thought was it's going to be mid-season. Maybe it's in January instead of February. I don't know if they want to compete with the NFL playoffs, but I thought it would be a legitimate mid-season tournament, and as a result, they would just reduce the number of regular season games. Because I think the issue that the NBA is having is that, it sounds ridiculous to say, but it's like there's almost too much basketball. It's not like the NFL where if you go from 16 to 17 games, it's that's a big increase because there's such a small amount available in the first place. But even then, people are like, there's a little bit of pushback. They're like, oh, the regular season's too long in the NFL. It's pushing into March. We're getting teams that don't deserve it making into the playoffs, getting a lot of 9-8 below 500 teams making it. So I think the NBA, the way to make the regular season more valuable and more attractive and reduce all this crap with load management and fans getting mad at Steph Curry not suiting up on a road trip or whatever is to reduce the number of games. So do you think that eventually they reduce the number of regular season games based on how much interest is in this tournament, or is this just going to be the baseline?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that this is the first incarnation of this. You want to see if it works, if it's exciting first. And then if it is, you can expand it like they have with the World Cup, right? I'm using that as an example because it's an exciting tournament where they expanded it. And, the next World Cup is going to be over 50 teams or something like that. So
I think it's 48. So from 32 to 48.
Yeah, it's a lot. So, but because for the World Cup, they're going to try and bring China and India into it, right? You just have these massive markets that never play in the World Cup. So I think that this is the first incarnation of it. Ideally, I would have liked to see less games as well. But it's, again, low risk. The reward, there's a huge ceiling for this if they pull it off.
So you think that the final of this tournament, whatever you want to call it, I think you called it what'd you call it on the All-Star pod?
The Gauntlet.
The Gauntlet, yeah, okay. So maybe it's called the David Stern Invitational, which I don't know if he would be a fan of this
the David
idea.
Stern, it should be called the David Stern Invitational.
Yeah, it's got to be something catchy. I don't
You mean Adam Silver.
Yeah, the Adam Silver Invitational, but he's still the commissioner, so I don't know if he wants to take all the credit. But yeah, maybe it's like a posthumous award for David Stern, or the trophies. Maybe the trophy's going to be named after David Stern because, anyway. So you think this is going to be, it's going to get ratings similar to, the Final Four or the Super Bowl, something like that?
That's hard. The Super Bowl, if you think about the most watched sporting events throughout the calendar year, the most watched in the U.S. is the Super Bowl. The next most watched is the AFC NFC Championship. The next most watched is the NFL divisional round. So that's really hard to get to. The NBA hasn't had, again, they haven't been able to top Jordan's last game in a Bulls jersey. The next closest game, I think, was Warriors-Cavs 2017 or something, the Kevin Durant first year. So they've had a hard time replicating eyeballs. I'm blaming a little bit of it on that 99 lockout, post-Jordan era, where the CBA, you had no basketball for many months at a time. And it's kind of like doing a podcast or other things, right? If you go away for so long, there'll be a drop-off of some kind. So that's where I think the league is still trying to find that. And look, this is just one way to add excitement. When you add stakes, like a single elimination tournament, there's opportunities. So, the sky's the limit for this thing.
Yeah, and I think the concern is because it's a one-off tournament, single elimination, I think you could end up with some real duds in the finals. If you tell me it's going to be Bucks-Lakers, you can slap LeBron's face on a billboard in Times Square and just be LeBron versus Giannis for all the marbles in the David Stern Invitational. But there's also a situation where, similar to the NCAA, where it could have been, Miami against San Diego State. Nobody really cares about that. It could be, the Brooklyn Nets against the Utah Jazz in the final for the David Stern Invitational, and nobody really cares because there's no narratives. So I appreciate the creativity. I like that they're taking risks, but I'll definitely watch it. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I'm not going to watch it, because just like the play-in tournament, I will 100% watch it. My initial thought is like, I don't think it's a big deal.
It's nice to take risks and try new ideas. The NBA, when did they get rid of hand checking and illegal defense? Maybe like in the 2000s, early 2000s, they got rid of that, and it really changed the league, right? When just defenses were different, you didn't see all that zone crap. Every single game, it changed defense. It made way for the 7-second Suns and the small ball Warriors and Miami Heat. So this is a great look at baseball. There's a pitch clock, and there's have to try and continue to reinvent yourself. The NFL added in overtime, you get another shot, right? If the other team scores first, you're not out of it yet. So I think it's good to keep trying things. If it doesn't work, figure it out later. But I think it's great. I think it's great that the league is self-aware that, like, look, we have more room for growth.
Okay, so we'll put a pin in this one. We'll talk about it in 2 years, and we'll see if it's a success or not. Because this one, obviously, you gotta see the long-term results. Because right now, like, the play-in has been a great success. There's been some classic games. There's been a couple duds, obviously, with like the 9-10 matchups and things like that. But there's some good stuff happening. So we'll come back to this. Sure. So the next topic, I'm looking at it and I hate it. Just right off the board, and that is the second tax apron. So that's what it's called. So basically, the teams, so the NBA or the new CBA, the NBA is going to implement what they call a second tax apron that will be $17.5 million above the tax line, and teams above that second apron will face, like, it's an insane set of restrictions. It's straight up, it's like economic fascism on these big spender NBA teams, but they won't have access to the following. They won't have access to the taxpayer mid-level exception. They won't be able to trade away first-round picks 7 years down the road. Won't be able to sign buyout players. They won't be able to send out cash in trades, which is a very common thing in the NBA. They do cash considerations for a player. They won't be able to take back more salary in a trade than they send out. And, supposedly we're going to be eased into these changes, but regardless of how long it takes for these to take into effect, I think some of them they can just go into effect next year. Maybe they give teams another season to recalibrate their salary caps. But I hate it. I just straight up hate it. Like, I think you're punishing success. You're punishing teams for spending. You're punishing owners for spending, and you're rewarding teams for not spending. What do you think?
Yeah, I think here's an example, right? This rule would have kept the Bucks from signing Joe Ingles, the Celtics from signing Danilo Gallinari, the Warriors from signing Dante DiVincenzo, the Clippers from signing John Wall. So yes, it's gonna. I think that just looking at that, if you're fans of those teams, you're like, well, those players that were very impactful this year. What do you mean we wouldn't have been able to sign them? So I don't like that. I guess the idea is to help lower and middle spending teams across the league have a better chance of adding more talent to their teams in free agency. But I think, like you said, if you're willing to spend and you're a big market team, that's good for the league. We love dynasties as a country. As sports fans, we love dynasties. And if I ran the NBA, I would want the Knicks and the Warriors and all the Lakers, all the big market teams to win the championship every year. Or if I own the NFL, I would want the Cowboys to win every year. Even though hasn't been possible for them, the idea is that the big market teams make it work. It's cool once in a while to have your Milwaukee Bucks or your Oklahoma City or to go to the Premier League, like your Leicester City, find a way to make it work. But I want Liverpool winning every year. I don't want Leicester City winning 3 times in a row or anything like that. So I think that this is, I'm not a fan of it either. It's rewarding frugal owners, Yeah, that's my thing. Is if you aren't willing to spend it, whose fault is that other than yours?
Exactly. Like, I'm not going to feel bad for a billionaire basically, who doesn't want to spend on his team. As a fan of the Oakland A's, I live through that or suffer through that every year, where the guy has a ton of money and he's just refusing to spend it, and he'd rather just collect the check. And I think what this also does is I think it creates a new problem, not a new problem, but it exacerbates a problem that the NBA is currently having, and I think that is the increase in player movement. So if you're going to be limiting the spending for these teams, I mean, you look at the Warriors, and the reason why they're so compelling, or one of the reasons why they're so compelling, is just because it's the same guys, it's the same faces, it's the same names. It's like a TV show, right? It's like Friends ran for 20 years and it was the same cast, and you're able to get to know these people, and there's narratives, and you watch them grow and develop. And then what they're doing by adding this is that they're going to increase the number of stars moving across the league, which personally I think is already a problem, because guys are getting fed up with their situation really early and they're leaving. And I think it creates like a flux in the NBA where especially the casual fans, don't know who's who and who's on what team and where's this guy playing and things like that. And it also, I think we've talked about this a few times, it really punishes teams not just for success, but for homegrown success. If you're the Warriors, you draft and develop 3 Hall of Famers. If you're a team like OKC, who drafted and developed 3 future MVPs, under this rule, I mean, they ended up not keeping these guys, but under this rule, they wouldn't be able to keep them, essentially. So, I don't know, what do you think about that aspect of it? I think that's a different angle that I think most people are talking about, is the player movement aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It sounds like the only players that teams will be able to keep are stars, because there's another element of the CBA with contract extensions that are changing. The limit now is 120%. It's going to go up to 140% with the new CBA. So Jaylen Brown, for example, if he signed a 4-year extension now, he'd get 165 million. With the new 140% rule, he could make a 4-year max of 189 million dollars. So that's kind of like what soccer does. Like every other year, you would see Barcelona extend Lionel Messi to have the highest contract in the world, and then Real Madrid would, in a petty way, give Ronaldo an extension to make him the highest paid. So you can continue to leverage contract extensions to keep your best players, as long as you can make them happy. But these like middling players, like a DiVincenzo, a Gallinari, these kind of glue guys that you need, this is the problematic portion of it. I think it'll continue to be an issue with this complication.
Yeah, and it doesn't reward success. It doesn't allow us to build narratives, and it's going to cause a lot more movement. And I mean, you say middling guys, but these are guys that can swing titles. I think these role players, they play a role for a reason. They show out and they do their thing. And obviously the stars are the ones that ultimately win the titles, but these glue guys and middle of the road type guys can help decide titles for sure. So I think we both agree, not a big fan, not fans of this, especially as fans of probably the biggest spenders in the NBA and the Warriors, and they weren't for a long time. So we've been on both sides of this. We know both sides of the coin, and we understand that, it can be tough being a quote unquote small market team, though I won't shed any tears for a billionaire owner, regardless of if they're in Oklahoma City or Portland or whatever they are. So I think we're both not fans of this. The next one, I've seen some split opinions on this, but I'll let you have a crack at it. But it's the awards. So there's 2 aspects of this. The first thing is that players will need to appear in a minimum of 65 games to be eligible to earn postseason awards such as the MVP, Rookie of the Year, All-NBA, etc. Before I go into my spiel, what do you think of this?
Yeah, this is interesting because, you've seen guys in the past win awards. The one that comes to mind for me right away, homerism, is Kawhi Leonard winning in, I think, 2016, where Draymond Green had played every game or almost every game, and Kawhi Leonard played, he missed like 25 games that season, and won Defensive Player of the Year. And it's like, well, he missed, like 20% of the season. Like, why should he still win Defensive Player of the Year? So for MVP and things like that, I think it's good. I think if guys want to win these awards, they feel incentivized to. I do like the idea of adding a minimum. Imagine if Jokic or Giannis missed, 35 games, but they were still in the MVP race because they had a great first 4 months of the season.
I think it addresses a problem that wasn't really a problem. You know what I mean? I get what you're saying if they miss, 30 games or whatever, but I think just even logically, I think a lot of voters are not all of them, but I think most of them would kind of logically eliminate guys from most awards if they are under, 60, 55 games, something like that. I think my issue is that it's too arbitrary. Basically, so if you play 63 games, it's not okay. You play 64 games, it's not okay. But you play 65 and it's okay. Like all of a sudden, I think another thing is we're going to see some shenanigans with. You remember last year with Drew Holiday, the last game of the season, he just took the tip off or took the. He did the tip and then checked out of the game, like did an intentional foul and checked out just so he could hit some kind of contract incentive. And everybody's like, "Oh, it's so cute, the Bucks let it happen because that's a contract incentive that's between him and the team." But I think we might start seeing some of that. I know it's going to affect the guys like per game stats. If you do that 3-4 times and you play technically, but you don't get any stats, then it's going to impact that. But I feel like it's resolving an issue that wasn't really an issue. I think maybe they put a range, but 65 games. Sure. I mean, you're missing 17 games. That's what, like 5.5, 6 weeks of the season. Like that's a couple sprained ankles. I don't know. What do you think?
I understand that. I think that for voters need to be mindful of shenanigans, as you called it. Like remember AC Green, where they would sub him in so that he would keep that streak of most games played, and they'd sub him in and take him out, and that was bullshit. So, I think that people should be aware of those little things like that. I think yes, if it's 60 instead of 65. There should be some sort of barometer for, like, look, so-and-so was easily like the third best player this season. They shouldn't be ineligible for MVP voting.
And I think the bigger impact is on All-NBA because I get it. If you don't think someone qualifies for first team All-NBA because they only played 60 games, sure. But second team, third team, I think it was Bill Simmons today that brought up the example of Steph Curry. Like he wouldn't technically be eligible for any of the All-NBA teams, but can you really look at the NBA this season and think this guy is not one of the 6 best guards in the NBA? He's not one of the 3 to 5 most important players to his team in the NBA. And I think that's the issue. And the fact that that's tied into their contracts because All-NBA has the impact on the max and the supermax and things like that. So I think MVP, sure, that's a one-off. Rookie of the year, nobody really cares. Most improved player, all that stuff doesn't really matter. But I think when it affects the money is where I have the issue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think this is going to come up. Like this is definitely, there's going to be a big deal and everyone's going to hate it. There's going to be a glaring omission of some kind. And this is going to get a lot of scrutiny, and it'll be revisited in the next CBA if it becomes loud enough.
Yeah, so we can, again, put a pin in that one, see where that goes. But as of now, I'm going to cast my vote in the no box, the nay box for this one. It sounds like you're okay with it.
It's fine. It's like you said, no one was asking for it. I'm sure that there was enough noise from someone, Daryl Morey probably or something, to bring this about.
Yeah.
If it becomes an issue, it'll be revisited. It's fine. It doesn't change the league significantly.
So. No, it doesn't. Okay. And then the second aspect of the awards is the fact that the 3 All-NBA teams, so not only will they have to play a minimum 65 games, but the All-NBA teams will now be positionless. So as of now, it's 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center, which has led to some really funny inclusions. Like DeAndre Jordan, I think, was first-team All-NBA at some point in his career. But now it's going to be completely positionless. So again, I'll let you get first crack at this one.
Yeah, that was 2016. It was like first-team All-NBA, Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard, and then DeAndre Jordan.
It was a very bleak time for centers. Like now, there's more centers than you know what to do with, but back then it was a pretty dark time for the position.
Yeah. So I think this depends on how much you care about the outlook of all NBA. Aside from like omissions, more so if you think all NBA should look somewhat like an actual basketball team you'd put on the court, DeAndre Jordan's aside, like if you're gonna have four guards because four guards were really good this year and that's who voters want. That's pretty problematic, right? Like it's like, hey, I liked Steph Curry and I liked Damian Lillard and I liked John Morant and De'Aaron Fox. Like, is that going to be first team All NBA? That's the weird part.
I can totally agree with that, and I think maybe a better solution is just do it like the All-Star game, just front court, back court. I think that's way easier to stomach because especially the two guards, two forwards thing. There's a lot of guys that, you know, are they a small forward? Are they a shooting guard? Like Jaylen Brown is like a prime example of that. Maybe like Andrew Wiggins, like depending on the lineup, he's the two guard or the three. So maybe we just do front court, back court because it could lead to some weird stuff, like you said, where you have four guards and a power forward or something at the first team All NBA. I think it was, again, Bill Simmons or Ryan Russillo who brought up a suggestion of it just being like the 15 best players, period. There's no first, second, third. It's just, here's the 15 best. Maybe they're even ranked 1 to 15, which would be really cool. I think it would lead to some fun arguments there. But I think, do you know if there's a difference in pay if you're third or second or first team All NBA, or is it all the same? Basically, just All NBA is one bucket.
I think it's based on your contract. If was it Anthony Davis who missed out because he got injured and he missed too many games, and all he had to do was be on any All NBA to get a bonus, and he didn't make any. He like barely missed out, and he lost on like a nice, chunk of change for making an All NBA bonus. So I guess it depends on the player. It makes sense for it to be any all-team NBA just because you never know. Like, look at Steph Curry this year, 55 or so games. He might make third-team All-NBA. So maybe that's a more fair way to... Like, if I was someone's agent, I wouldn't negotiate first-team All-NBA only, right? Like, don't do a Ricky Williams thing where it's crazy, incentive-heavy, and you can make it kind of blanket. If you make first-team All-NBA, maybe you add that as a kicker. I don't know how flexible these contracts get, but it makes sense for it to be just make all-team NBA.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's if you make any of those because it's a pretty prestigious thing. I think the only time it really comes up, whether you're first or second or third, is when people decide like who's a better player all time, or maybe your Hall of Fame resume. But they let anybody into the Hall of Fame, so I don't think they really nitpick. Maybe the top 75. I think they brought up like the fact that Dwight Howard made X amount of first team All NBAs, and he's the only one on that was left off the list that met that criteria. But he was also in that time where there was a real lack of depth and talent at the center position. So, and it's funny you bring up Anthony Davis because I'm sure he's looking at this like, damn, I'm never going to get on any awards. I'm never going to make All NBA again. Like 65 games is like climbing Mount Everest for that guy. So I'm sure he's not a fan of that. So the next one we'll talk about is some changes to the cap. This is a little more technical financial stuff, but basically the biggest thing that I see from this is that there will be no more than a 10% increase per league year in the salary cap to avoid what we saw. You mentioned in 2016 that big cap spike where it went up by 32%. So there's cap smoothing. So I think we're in agreement that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the value of the league is going to continue to go up. The new TV deal that comes out will help. It'll continue to go up. So I think it's fine. Yeah.
And then there's an increase to the value of the mid-level exception. Luxury tax brackets are going to be, they used to be at $5 million above the tax line. Now they're going to increase at the same rate as the salary cap. So I don't think that's a big deal at all. It just kind of goes up as the cap goes up. And the cool thing is that for the second round players or second round selections is that there's a new cap exception. So if you're drafted in the second round, teams no longer need to use cap room or the mid-level exception to give second round rookies salaries worth more than the rookie minimum or deals longer than 2 years. So if you hit on a diamond in the rough in the second round, you can pay them accordingly. So they don't, jump ship in a couple of years. So I don't know. I don't think there's any debate there. It's just kind of is what it is.
Yeah, it's good.
All right. And then there's a couple stuff in the draft. Nothing crazy there. You're going to do some physical evaluations, and the one and done rule has still not changed. How do you feel about the one and done rule?
Yeah, the one and done rule, I think, more so affects college basketball than it does the NBA. Just because you don't see, like, look at the women's national championship that just happened, where, you know, Caitlin Clark was in last year's tournament and she's in this year's tournament, and you continue to see the same players now in men's college basketball. Most guys, you might see them for a little bit, they play in a couple games, and then their team gets eliminated, and you look forward to seeing them in the league, but it doesn't do much for college basketball. It's a fresh face every year. There isn't a face of college basketball, and it's kind of just becoming a mandatory thing, like you have to go here before you go to the league. So it's fine. I think maybe what they wanted to do was give more of a choice versus let this be the farm system. It's not with NIL now, it's not as big of a deal, so I guess it doesn't really make it a bottleneck for guys to make it to the league. It's fine.
On the women's side, it's still 3 years. They're still like stuck in the Stone Age NFL style where you have to play college ball for 3 years. Or maybe might even be 4. Like Caitlin Clark is a junior and she still has to play one more year in college before. But again, with NIL, it's not a big deal because I'm sure she's cleaning up. She'll do 1 million endorsements this summer and, you know, make plenty of money. So I'm not really tripping about that. The same thing on the NBA side. Even the one and done rule, you can play in the G League, you can go overseas, or you can play in college and make a shit ton of money on Instagram doing stuff and doing TikToks or whatever it is that kids do these days. My favorite example of that, it's not even an NBA player, but it's this LSU gymnast who apparently is going to be making, you know, $8 to $10 million a year just because she looks good in a leotard. So good for her.
Hey, get it how you can. There's nothing wrong with any of that.
Yeah, I think we're 100% pro NIL on this podcast for sure. And then there's some miscellaneous stuff, which is kind of funny. Players will no longer be tested for marijuana use. I didn't even know that was still a thing. Yeah, I thought it was just the hard stuff.
Yeah. I also assumed that. I think they were already pretty light on it anyway. I think they just made it a formal announcement that it's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody being suspended for that. So maybe was it OJ Mayo or is he on some other stuff? Or maybe, was it Tyreek Evans too?
Yeah, I'm one of those guys. The only person that comes up for me is poor Josh Gordon, but in the NFL. But NBA, nothing comes to mind for me.
Yeah, he got railroaded by the NFL. This one was kind of cool, is that the players will be allowed to invest in NBA and WNBA franchises via a private equity firm. I think that's pretty cool, especially on the WNBA side. I think that's a good way for the game to grow on the women's side. Yeah,
I imagine they'll just have like an audit or something like that to make sure that there's no convolution or conflict of interest. So I think this is great. I think it's just another way to have equity sharing amongst players. It's cool. And sports betting is going to continue to be a big thing as more states acquire sports betting. So it's great. I think it's a very capitalistic addition to the CBA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's in reference to players being allowed to promote or invest in companies involved with sports betting and cannabis. So any involvement with sports betting companies will require what the NBA calls complete separation from the gambling component, which is kind of funny. It's like, isn't sports betting gambling? But I don't know if I understand the distinction there.
I think you just have equity in the company versus, betting. You're not allowed. It's not like a Calvin Ridley situation, basically, where even if it was just $1,800 or whatever it was he bet, this is more so. That's why I mentioned the audit part. They'll audit that the funds are coming from the company, not from anything else.
Got it. So it won't be like LeBron throwing up an extra a shot just to get a rebound because he's got himself on his like the FanDuel. He's got himself on a daily fantasy team or something.
Yeah, or the over under was 17 attempted shots or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure LeBron and guys like that, they can hit a single game parlay, just do their thing. Yeah, take the over on all my stats.
So you'd be creating 400 Tim Donahues if that was the case.
Can you imagine? I mean, that's like the nightmare scenario. If like LeBron's like, I'm gonna take the under on my shots and my rebounds, and I'm gonna pull up with a fake. I mean, maybe not LeBron because he's got plenty of money, but a lot of middling guys, maybe Dante DiVincenzo pulls up with a hamstring injury in the second quarter of a back-to-back, and he's like, well, I guess I hit my under on all my stats. And then the last one here is that the team and league licensing revenue will be added to the NBA's basketball-related income for the first time. I think this is a bigger deal than it's made out to be here. This seems like almost like a footnote to this, but what can you tell me about this, or do you know anything more about this?
So this is so basketball related income, from what I understand, it has always been a little above 50%, 60%. So this is like merchandise, right? Value, rev share between the players and the owners. Yeah. So, I mean, it's good. It's good that it's always kind of been there. I think they're just continuing that relationship, right? The basketball related income's kind of always been a thing. And they're just continuing that relationship.
Yeah, and it's increasing some of the revenue streams by making it licensing and stuff. And, you know, this is where the lawyers come in and the auditors and all that, and they figure out what's what. But it seems like a rising tide lifts all boats. So of the ones that we listed, I think the clear winners for the in-season tournament are probably the owners, because players are playing more, right? Or would you say the players? Okay. Yeah. So the owners won that one. I think the second tax apron, I would say a little over half of the owners won that one. I don't know, how many teams do you consider small market? Is it like 10, 15 of the 30? Maybe somewhere like around there?
Yeah, I'd have to break it out, but there's definitely, it's a more parity, and there's more small market than big market teams.
Yeah, and I think the way billionaires stay billionaires is by being cheap. So,
what I'm curious about long term though is how loose that definition gets. I mean, Kevin Durant, if it's more going to be player centric than market centric, where Kevin Durant made Oklahoma City a thing, or Giannis has made Milwaukee popular, I wonder if that will continue to shift based on the quality of players that enter these markets.
Yeah, and I think they can definitely raise the profile, but I think at the end of the day, the owners are still the owners. Like we saw Milwaukee cheap out on PJ Tucker. We saw OKC cheap out on James Harden. It was a long time ago, but still the same idea. Like Milwaukee's still Milwaukee, OKC's still OKC, Orlando's still Orlando, etc. Like even if, you know, LeBron himself goes to Cleveland, like or not Cleveland, but if he goes to Orlando or something, it's still a smaller market team, and they're hesitant to spend the money for whatever reason. But again, no tears shed for billionaires here. So the owners, half of the owners, or a little over half, won that, and the Warriors and Clippers and a couple other the repeat offenders definitely lost that one. The awards, no winners. Maybe the players lose because some of these guys will miss out on some of the awards because they played 62 games instead of 63. And maybe the owners are happy because less guys will qualify, or different guys will qualify for All-NBA, so maybe that impacts their bottom line. But it seems like really...
I wonder though, if you're the owner of a team with several good players that makes All-NBA, if it's crippling if 3 of them make All-NBA just because of the positionless portion of, you're like, damn, I got to give out like $45 million in All-NBA because they all qualified.
Well, now I think you can only have 2 Supermax deals on your team now, I think, as a result of this tax apron, basically. But I keep bringing up his name, but Jaylen Brown is a prime example of somebody that his future is directly impacted by if he makes All-NBA this year or not, because the Celtics can offer him a ton more money than anybody else if he makes All-NBA, because of the bird rights, because of the way that his contract is structured. But if he doesn't make it, then he can go to, I don't know, wherever he's from, whatever team he wants to go to, and they can offer him pretty much the same as the Celtics. So there is some real financial impacts, but I think we talked about, let's put a pin in this one and see where we are in a couple years. But I definitely think there's some major financial impact that's going to come up here. So the other stuff, the draft stuff, miscellaneous stuff. I guess the miscellaneous stuff they won because they have more. The players won this one because they won't be tested for weed anymore, which is nice. And they'll be able to invest and make some money off the NBA and the growing WNBA. And yeah, they'll be able to shill for FanDuel or DraftKings or whatever you want to call it. So good for them. Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I actually have one more that I think is a win for both sides. They actually also added more two-way contract slots to rosters.
Oh, that's right. I had that written. I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So how many do they have now?
So I think they allow teams to carry 2 now. I think now they can have 3 because I know that Miami, for example, had Max Strus and Duncan Robinson at the same time. So now you can have more of those. So it's a great way to have guys sign an NBA contract to play for their NBA team and the G League affiliate, which is good. I mean, it's low cost for the owners, and it develops a couple of success stories like the Heat, Alex Caruso, Austin Reeves, another couple good examples, Jose Alvarado, Lou Dort, even Anthony Lamb has had a decent season. He's been a good success story for the Warriors, who've been pretty injury riddled. So I think it's good. I think it's a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, it's like as close as you'll get to the soccer loan system in the NBA. And I think, and our friend of the podcast, Trevor Hudgens on the Houston Rockets / Rio Grande Valley Vipers is on a current 2-way deal. Yeah, our guy Trev on a 2-way deal with the Rockets and the Vipers. He's made a handful of NBA appearances. Maybe he'll play a little bit more down the stretch here, but yeah, I'm always a fan. I mean, I like it. That is definitely a win for the players. It's a win for the owners too. Like you said, it's a low cost alternative. It's a low cost chance to develop some talent. It's a low cost way to tank as well because you can just play these 2-way guys at the end of the year. So that works out for everybody. So that's it for the podcast. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you guys checking us out. Please make sure to follow, like, and subscribe to the 4040 Vision podcast everywhere you find podcasts. Make sure to leave us a review, 5 stars if you can, and make sure to follow us on all social media platforms, especially Instagram and Twitter at 4040 Vision Pod. Thanks, Osama. Appreciate you, man.